Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the New Hampshire Business Show. My name is Chris Pastrana, and today we're doing something a little bit different because it's that time every 4 years we get to talk about politics a little bit. So today I have Michelle McCartney. You know her from a few podcasts she's done on the show with me before. Today she's here as she's running for a state rep for District 15 of the Republican Party of Merrimack County.
Yes.
Yep, correct. All right, so for those of you who haven't seen any of our podcasts before, tell us a little bit about yourself, and then let's talk about your politics.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. So obviously this will be a little bit different because we're talking about politics. Yeah. But I am running for state rep, and I kind of want to start it off with really the reason why I started running, because one of the big things is you don't really see a lot of women in politics. Mm-hmm. And especially the Republican Party, right? The Republican Party is known as anti-women or something. But really, the big thing to me was when you have children, all of a sudden politics become relevant. And I think that this is important to talk about because there are a lot of people out there who don't want to look at politics. They say, oh, that's the conversation we don't want to have. And I think it's important to have that conversation because when you're talking about politics, that's society, that's culture, that's the family that that's the world that your kids are going to live in. Yeah. And it's important. And so, especially in today's culture, I've seen a huge turn for what I consider to be the worst. And it's kind of prompted me to get involved. So I live in Concord. And in Concord, there's this tiny little Ward 6, which is District 15, and it's the tiniest little section of Concord. So if you're in that ward, vote for me. But basically, I was sitting there and all these things were happening, and the district that I'm in is very blue. It's very Democrat. There wasn't even going to be any Republicans running. And in fact, the Democrats have a huge advantage just because it's blue. And basically what that means is it's an area where people tend to vote Democrat without really looking at the candidates. They just vote Democrat because it's Democrat. Yeah. And so Republicans tend to have a very hard time there. And so I said, you know what? I'm just going to run. We'll do it, and we'll see what happens. Yeah. So that's kind of, where we're at. Mm-hmm. But that whole... There's a lot of issues that are coming up that I think it's really important that people have a say in. And so my biggest goal is to really reach out and say, who are the people who are not really being represented? Yeah. And what are they looking for? And maybe there's a conversation we need to have around that. If maybe it's, policies that people don't agree on, but that conversation has to happen because it's not happening right now. Mm-hmm. And there's a lot of pushback on, certain sides that are kind of, if you say that, you're a horrible person, or you're not allowed to have opposing views. And I think that's a very dangerous precedent that we're putting forward now.
Yeah. Yeah, I totally agree with you. There's never a time where you're not allowed to have a different point of view on something. If you say whatever it is, you're you don't get to have an opinion. There's no opinion you're allowed to have. Well, one, you're a fool. Yeah. Because you can't change everything if you're not allowed different points of view. That's absurd. I hate that argument. It's the worst. Mm-hmm. So, yes, what I was saying. So you have to have different point of views because you have to have fresh insight. If you don't have fresh insight from fresh eyes, how are you ever going to change anything? That's absurd to say you want to change things and then not allow fresh points of view, right? So I think that's always been a problem in politics is two things from me. I know this isn't really your campaign here, but...
No, but it all helps because I'm supposed to be representing the people. Yeah, so the more I hear...
So it's the unwillingness to admit when you're wrong. Mm-hmm. Because politics, in general, they have this habit of saying, okay, we're going to do this to fix the problem. Mm-hmm. Oh, no, that didn't fix the problem. Let's legislate something else to fix the problem. How about we just remove the thing that didn't work and start again from there, But they can't do that. They can't ever admit they were wrong. They did something wrong. One, that's a problem, but it's politics. Mm-hmm. Still a problem. Yeah. And then again, like you're saying, no fresh points of view. There are, I will say the Democratic Party has a problem with if you don't follow their doctrine exactly, they have issues. They won't even hear your point of view. And I'm like, well, that's absurd.
Exactly.
Because you want... So this is the problem and the benefit of the Libertarian Party is everyone has a vastly different point of view, and that's good. You have a lot of people with a lot of points of view, a lot of dialogue going on about how to improve things, and at the same time, they don't have that strict line, so they're not a very formidable party.
Yeah.
That's enough for my
Yes.
politics. So let's talk a little bit about what I like about state politics, and the reason why on the New Hampshire Business Show I'll talk politics every once in a while is everyone loves to talk national politics, where state politics actually affect you more. Typically, it's supposed to be that way. The problem that it isn't is an issue, personally.
Yeah.
So there are always issues that at a state level affect us more. So you want to talk a little bit about, I guess, the Republican platform, your platform. Why are you running for District 15?
Yeah. So there's a couple things that actually came to mind during, what you were just saying. And I think there's a couple things, especially when you're talking about people needing to admit when they're wrong. And two things hugely popped into my brain. And so one of them is I'm a huge advocate for health freedom. I believe people should be able to make their own health choices, and there should be no coercion. And coercion can be anything between you're not allowed in schools, you need this to have this job. Those are all forms of coercion. And so there's one of the things that came to mind is there's something called the New Hampshire Vaccine Association. So basically it's a board, it's a committee in New Hampshire, and a lot of people don't even know that it exists. And essentially what it does is it orders vaccines from the CDC and it distributes them throughout the state. It's all taxpayer funded. So by the way, like our taxes pay for vaccines, whether or not you're receiving them. And what this vaccine association was supposed to do was create a state registry. They were given, and I can't remember the exact numbers, but it was something like, $1 million or a couple $1 million to create the state registry.
Yeah.
Well, a few years later, we're like, oh wait, they never did it. Like there's no state registry. What's going on? And they basically couldn't even account for what happened to the money. So the money's just gone. No transparency because they're not telling us what happened, and there's no accountability because there's no slap on the wrist for it. So what they did was they said, well, but we need more money because now we're going to do the state registry, and so obviously we need money because we don't have any of those millions of dollars you gave us before. So they all signed it and gave them more money. Now they've racked up, I think it's like over $4 million now that they've racked up, which is all taxpayer dollars, to go to the state registry, which is a opt-out registry, by the way. So once it goes into effect, they send out information to the doctor's offices who basically says, give us all your, immunization records from all your patients. The doctor at that point can decide whether or not they want to do that or whether or not they want to notify their patients and say, hey, do you want to opt out of this? How many of them do you really think are going to notify their patients to opt out? Probably very slim.
Yeah, because in that situation, you're running up against to waste of time and money to go through that process, or just say, oh, it's a state board.
Exactly.
Trust the state.
So it's unfortunate because there's a lot of people who view that as a health violation, like a privacy violation. They don't want their information going to the state and being kept in some state, registration, because it's not opt-in, which I think would make a lot more sense. It's opt-out. And so there's a lot of conversation about how to go about that. And, it's just really unfortunate. And again, like you were talking about, when people mess up, it's like they had millions of dollars. Who knows what they did with it. Then they needed more, and we just signed it over all right, fine, let's just do it. At what point are people going to sit there and say, you need to be held liable for what you're doing?
Yeah.
And so that's something I'm very passionate about too. I believe that committee has basically, it's no longer serving its function. To be honest with you, there's absolutely no, unbiased party that's on the committee board. I've sat in and listened, and I've been a part of the community part of that for a couple of years now. So I've been watching it. I kind of see how it works, and there's absolutely no unbiased opinion in that room. So it's really unfortunate that that's here, but that's right here in New Hampshire. And I think that's one of the things that people don't realize is that's taxpayer dollars. So if you don't agree with, an infant being given a STD shot, which they do, that's the hepatitis B is, your taxpayers are still paying for it whether or not you agree with it. So I always, one of my biggest platforms also is lower taxes. I don't believe we should be, raising taxes, and I believe that the most we can lower it, the better. And I believe in, looking through the budgets and seeing where we can take budget cuts to figure out what else we need to do with the state. There's no reason why we should be raising taxes at all.
Yeah. So now we can jump into this area. This is always a fun conversation to have because taxes, for whatever reason, people have this like stranglehold on the word and the concept. They're like, you have to pay taxes, you have to do it, you have to do it, you have to do all this crazy stuff, right? But, once you establish the organization, it's very hard to take money from it. So you have people who are now have a job because it's taxpayer funded or whatever, and they're like, oh, we don't want to give up our departments. So, but this is always what we get into when we start talking politics is everyone's like, oh, where are you going to take the money from? You're going to take it from the children, or you're going to take it from the old people? So let's talk a little bit about the taxes a little bit in maybe not where you could take money from, because it's hard to get into that without looking at the books and being like, well, you don't need this. This is absurd. But maybe your tax platform in general. Talk a little bit about it. Yeah.
So I think a lot of that depends on, and again, it's hard to make those determinations when you don't have the books in front of you. But for instance, like we were just talking about the New Hampshire Vaccine Association, and it's like, okay, if you want to do it that way, why are we bringing in more money to a organization that clearly is not doing what they need to do, right? And so there's things like that where it's like, okay, if we need a state registry for the vaccines, then maybe we should be reforming that, organization to make it so that they'll actually create the registry that they said that they were going to do. And so we're not spending millions and millions of dollars, which, by the way, this was voted on, I think, last year, and they still haven't created the registry as far as I'm concerned. There's been no movement on it.
Yeah.
So who knows? We might end up giving them more in another couple years, And to me, like, that's a huge waste of money. Yeah. Like, they should have first sat there and said, okay, this is what we're going to do. Here's how much, this is our projection as to how much money we need, and then get started. Like, there's no reason why we should have to keep giving them money for something that they're not doing. And so I think it's really holding things accountable for what they're doing and what they're not doing, looking at that transparency and saying, where is the money really going? Can we change things? So right now, obviously, there's a huge issue right now with public schools.
Yeah.
Because the public schools the buildings themselves have not been open. And so what you're finding is these parents are starting to get a little annoyed because they're saying, well, I'm paying all this money in property taxes because New Hampshire, we don't have income tax, we don't have sales tax. They get all their money from property taxes, meals and board taxes in other ways. And so when you're looking at these parents who are saying, I'm spending a fortune in property taxes every year and the schools aren't doing their job, or like I have a kid with an IEP. The schools are required to perform certain services for kids with IEP as long as they're enrolled in public school. Well, they're not. And so, and you're still paying taxes. They're still getting paid. And my husband was a plumber and recently switched careers, but at the beginning of the coronavirus thing, he was going into these public schools and switching out water heaters, updating like all their appliances. Yeah. So they're still spending the money.
Yeah.
Nobody's there, but, they're not doing their job properly, but the money's still going. And so, don't get me wrong. There are some kids who are excelling with the remote learning. Maybe they were being bullied in school, and so this is giving them an opportunity to, excel. But that's a very, very small percentage. The most of the conversations that I've been having are kids with IEPs who are severely struggling, kids who were very social, are very struggling with depression and anxiety now. There's a lot of, downsides to them not opening. And so again, a lot of that is, okay, if you're not going to open, what do we need to do? Because we need to look at that budget and we need to figure out what's going to make the most financial sense and go with that. So my biggest platform when you're looking at taxes is you need to look at each of those organizations. And they're always money, money grubbing. Yeah. They want all the money because then they can, do what they do.
When the coronavirus hit, and they put everyone out of school for a little bit, like the first thing they did was they were like, we need more money for unexpected expenditures.
For laptops, for kids who don't have them. And,
like the way, again, this goes back to what we're talking about with taxes. The way politicians handle money is absurd. And that comes generally from the outside. That's a lot of them.
Yeah.
So as a bookkeeper yourself.
Yes. I was just about to say I am a bookkeeper, and so I do think that does kind of give me a little bit of an advantage
Mm-hmm.
to be able to sit there and look at something and say, that's kind of like, that's not industry standard.
Yeah.
That's a little higher than you should be. Why? And, I'm a huge proponent of, competency. That's my biggest thing. I believe in free market. I believe that's to me is the height of competency. Because if something's not working properly, then people have the choice to take their business elsewhere. And I think the problem is when you look at state-run institutions that use tax dollars, is they don't have that issue because they get paid no matter how poor they're running or how great they're running.
Mm-hmm. And oftentimes when they're running poorly, they say, we need more money.
Mm-hmm.
So it's kind of this self-fulfilling
Yeah.
loop of incompetency.
Yeah.
Where they're like, oh, the worse we do, the more we get paid, so let's just do a bad job at everything.
Right, exactly. When we
Yeah.
should be rewarding positive
Yeah.
behavior.
Yeah, but so you kind of see where I fall on a lot of these issues. So I don't mean to keep prodding at different areas, but
No, yeah.
so now that we're talking about schools, schools and a lot of things in, how do I word this? Unions. So
Yes.
the problem with these political conversations is there are some things that are just like the kiss of death where they instantly, you're going to get a lot of hate for even talking about them. Again, my point of view is you have to have these conversations. If I bring something up and you just can't even talk about it, you probably shouldn't be in politics. I'm talking to a very specific party right now.
Yeah.
I'm going to get a lot of hate, sorry. But having said that, just for putting an R in your name, people are going to hate you regardless.
Oh, absolutely.
So let's have the conversation. Unions. The school union. Coronavirus has brought out some very interesting issues with the unions. You want to get a little bit into your policies as far as dealing with them. I don't know how much that's dealt with at the state level because I'm not in state politics too much.
Yeah.
You want to talk a little bit? Because I know it does. Do we go back to school? Do we not? Now you have the union saying we're not, and the politicians are like, no,
You kind of
you
have
are.
to.
Yeah,
That's your job.
Yeah.
So, I'm going to be honest with you. I think that, and again, it depends because you don't know somebody's personal life. You don't know if they've got, some sort of super elderly person that they, live with and they're looking out for that person. You don't know if they work in a nursing home, or if they themselves are immune compromised. You don't know. So I try to give people the benefit of the doubt.
Yeah.
But when the vast majority of people are sitting there and deciding that the world is unsafe, over the coronavirus, I absolutely, that's the most ridiculous thing to me.
Yeah.
So I've been active in the Reopen New Hampshire group since the conception of it. I've gone to all the different rallies. I'm going to be perfectly honest with you. I have not worn a mask. My family doesn't wear a mask. We have been perfectly fine, but you know what? We're healthy people. And so for us, the statistical, chance of having any sort of a complication if we were to get it is so slim that I'm not concerned because quite frankly, the flu would be more deadly for us than the coronavirus is. So when you're looking at those different types of things, and then you're finding out that the New Hampshire Teachers Union is basically stating that we are going to fight any efforts to reopen the schools. You have to think, are they politically minded? Is this all political ploy? Or is this actually for the better for the children and the teachers involved? And it has to be a political ploy. And I say that because all of the data we have, and at this point in time, we have a pretty significant amount of data to make educated decisions on this. It's not like this thing just came out. We've been tracking it for like almost a year now.
Yeah.
So, we have enough information and we know that children are the least affected. We know that, in fact, children are so unaffected. It's like 0.02% of complications in, children, in school-age children. And so we know that they can get over this rather quickly. We know that they're fine. We know that there hasn't really been any cases of asymptomatic transmission. And that's a whole nother conversation if we want to get into that about the whole asymptomatic transmission theory, but, there's so much information we have now that we have to make decisions that are not based on fear, but are based on science. And when we look at the science, I do think it's important to give people, the choice. I think that, if you have teachers who are in that kind of, immune compromised or they're in those, comorbidities is what they call it, then I think that they should have the choice to sit there and say, you know what, I'm going to kind of step back for a little bit and I'm going to quit my job and hopefully I'll be able to find another job when I feel comfortable going out in the public. Or they can sit there and say, I'd like to opt in to do one of those remote classes for, kids who are maybe part of that comorbidity or have family members who are parents who don't feel comfortable sending their kids to school. I believe in school choice, I believe in educational choice, and I believe in freedom. So I believe that people should have those choices. What I don't believe in is shutting down all of the schools and saying we're not going to open no matter what parents and children need because of reasons we can't really outline.
Yeah. Yeah, because like I said, that's always been a thing. And I don't want to get too much into the... Well, maybe, I do want to talk politics, but the coronavirus is kind of an outlier when it comes to all this stuff. But it is going to be heavy when it comes time for your elections. So it is okay to talk about those. I don't think, so I'm not going to get too much on that.
That's okay.
What did I want to, school choice. You mentioned school choice. This is definitely an area where it comes up a lot, especially in New Hampshire, where I think they turn it down a bunch of times or something. I forget all the politics there because there's so much going on. So let's talk a little bit about what school choice is and then kind of your feeling on that one.
Yeah, so in New Hampshire, charter schools are actually typically a part of the public school system. So there's a lot of people that are like, oh, well, just look at charter schools if you don't want public schools. But they kind of go by a lot of the same rules and regulations that the public schools do. But I think it's important that parents have that choice to be able to send their kids wherever they want. So whether it's the public school system, whether it's a charter school, whether it's a private school, whether it's homeschooling, I think that those options should be heavily available for all, families. So homeschooling in New Hampshire is actually very easy to do. All you have to do, and I will talk about it just because of everything that's going on right now, I think it's important that parents know. So to homeschool your children, if you decide not to send them back to school with all the different provisions that they have going on in the remote learning, all you have to do is basically send a letter to the school district, which is called a letter of intent. And you basically state your kids, first, last name, date of birth, just some basic information so they can identify them. And you just basically state, I'm homeschooling them. I'm pulling them out of the school district. So when you do that every single year, all you have to do is basically give them a test to let them know where they are, or they can do like an evaluation from a certified teacher. So there are a few different options. I highly recommend there's a group out there called the Granite State Home Educators Group, and they're absolutely amazing because they kind of go through like the laws, the regulations about homeschooling in New Hampshire, and we are very fortunate that New Hampshire is very homeschool friendly. So it's incredibly easy to get your kids pulled out of school. It's incredibly easy. There's a lot of freedom involved. You don't have to use a specific curriculum. So I think that that's really great, and I really try to advocate for that because, again, especially when you're in a situation right now where the public school system is making choices that, quite frankly, a lot of the parents don't agree with, it's important to know what your options are,
Yeah. So as far as New Hampshire politics go, are school choice kind of an area that's fought over a lot? Do you know?
Not that I'm aware of.
Okay.
So I will tell you, this is my first time I'm running. It's not like I have a history of being in politics. This is my first year running. I'm still learning a lot. But from what I've seen, school choice is, it tends to be more of a Republican thing. A lot of Republicans put that as, part of their platform. But it seems to be something that, like, in New Hampshire, we're pretty... it's pretty easy so far. So I don't think there's a whole lot of discussion about it at this point.
Okay. Yeah, because I know at the national level, this comes up a lot.
Yeah.
And there's a very, not to get too much into national politics, but there is a very big platform to get rid of homeschooling, get rid of school choice, and everything has to be public school, which I think is well, it's not my opinion. But, all right, so let's get on to another one that's pretty big as far as politics go. I'm gonna save the fun one for last. So let's talk not taxes, minimum wage. Minimum wage laws.
Yes, this is a fun one because a lot of people get very hyped up about it.
Yes.
I fully believe, and again, I'm a huge fan of rewarding competence, right? And so I don't believe in raising the minimum wage at all. And there's a few different reasons for that. One of them is because most jobs that pay minimum wage are not careers. They're quick jobs. And we should be rewarding skills and competence. And so I once had somebody who, they came to me and they were, arguing about the difference between labor and skilled labor, and that skilled labor was just a word to get those people paid more. Mm-hmm. And that drove me up a wall because my husband was a plumber. Mm-hmm. He went to school for 4 years, paid a lot of money, not as much as a college, but we paid a lot of money out of pocket for him to do that. And, you pay all this money, you go to school for 4 years, you take these exams, you get a license, and if you mess up, they remove your license, you can go to jail. There's a lot of, downside to that.
Yeah.
Whereas you can be a drywaller, you don't go to school, you don't really pay anything for an education. There's really no consequences to what you do if you mess up or if you do a horrible job, and they're going to get paid minimum wage, whereas this person's going to get paid a reasonable living wage. Mm-hmm. And so when you're looking at the two of those, it's easy to sit there and say, well, they both do hard work, so they should both be paid the same amount. And that's just not the case because there's a difference in liability. Right? This one has a lot more liability, a lot more riding on their shoulders. They have to go out and test every 2 years to keep their license current. There's a lot more to it. And you're paying money to do that. You pay money to keep your license. And these licenses aren't cheap, whereas this one doesn't really have any of that. And so, no, I don't think that minimum wage should be increased. I think that you get paid based on the amount of effort you put in, the amount of skills that you bring forth. If you're going to get a promotion, it's because you earned it. Not because, you demanded more money. That's kind of the general mentality that I have. And so I struggle when people sit there and say, well, everybody should earn a living wage. And it's like, well, that's true. But if you want a living wage, then you should go out and learn a skill that's marketable. Mm-hmm.
Right.
And
so we do agree quite a bit on this.
Okay.
I know we do. I'm still going to pick at the argument a little bit.
Yeah.
Just for fun.
Yeah.
Why not? So one of the big things that comes up, mm-hmm. we talk about, raising minimum wages and all that stuff. So how do I always wear this? Sorry, I'm trying to.
No, that's okay.
Understand their arguments too.
Yeah.
So you go out, like you said,
mm-hmm.
situations happen where you can't get a better paying job. Mm-hmm. You don't have the skills, so they want, even those people, mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
The people who don't have the plumbing degrees and all
mm-hmm.
that stuff to be able to have a living wage.
Yeah.
So where you fall on, again, bad situations where people, like I said, they don't have those skills. Mm-hmm. So all they can get is a job at McDonald's or whatever.
Yeah. So again, I do think there's a lot of opportunity to get skill sets. Mm-hmm. Especially in today's day and age where it's like we're in the age of information.
Yeah.
And there's another conversation that I think is important to have where a lot of people don't realize that right now our current standard of living is significantly better than it has ever been in the history of mankind. And so when people sit there and say, this is how much money I need to survive, my question mm-hmm. is always, well, what do you need to survive? Because you sure as heck don't need internet. You sure as heck don't need that flat screen TV. Yeah. You probably don't even need that fancy, Verizon phone. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of things that you can cut back on. I literally call up all of my providers and all of my bills every single October and I negotiate them because I'm not going to pay more than I have to, and that's something that I do. And I think that's something that everybody should do. And so my biggest question is when people are sitting there and saying, and again, situations happen and I completely understand that. And it's gonna come off as very, I guess, not caring, but it's not that way at all. Mm-hmm. It's just things happen. Life is hard, and it's hard for everybody, whether or not you make more money or not. There are obviously some things that are going to be easier the more money you make, but life is just hard in general. And there's going to be times in life where it's very easy. And there's going to be times in life where, you're sitting there saying, how am I going to pay my next bill? Just a couple of years ago, my husband and I were living in an apartment where literally, while I was pregnant with my daughter, I had to take baths because my shower would squirt out scalding hot water. And I was afraid, seriously, afraid that if I jumped out of the water while pregnant, what if I slipped and fell and, something horrible happened? So I literally took baths my entire pregnancy because I was so scared, but it's those are the sacrifices that people make, to live. And again, when I talk about where we're at now versus where we've been at in the history of mankind, mm-hmm. Our standard of living now is so coddled. You can get away with living, even if you've got a couple kids, a single mom and a couple kids in a studio apartment. Yeah, that's going to be cramped. Yeah, that's going to be difficult, but it's doable. And I think that's where our society needs to get to, is our idea of doable is more aligned with what's comfortable. And that's not exactly true.
Yeah.
And I think that instead of focusing on sitting there and telling people, you deserve a comfortable lifestyle, you should just, get paid that for not learning anything. Instead, we should be sitting there and saying, look, you're getting by, you're doing a good job. What are some things that you can do to build yourself to get into a better job? What are some things that you can do? Maybe it's something as simple as, okay, you're getting by and you're fine and you're working at McDonald's and you're doing that. What are some other skill sets you have? Can you build a business with it and do your own thing? Can you, make a little extra money on the side, maybe running an in-home daycare? Like, there's so many things. If people just put their minds to it, you can figure out ways to make extra money. You can figure out ways to cut costs. And I think that's more valuable to talk to people about than saying, let's just raise the minimum wage. Don't worry about inflation. Don't worry about, McDonald's, automizing all of their systems because they can't afford to pay people all this money. We don't worry about that. Let's just do it. Like, there's so much more that goes into the minimum wage that people don't realize. And that's important to recognize, that every action has a consequence. And instead of just doing what's comfortable and easy, quote unquote easy, we really need to think about it and say, okay, this action is going to have a lot of consequences that are really going to come back and bite us in the butt and really basically ruin all the things we were trying to accomplish. So instead, let's focus on building these people up and, maybe getting rid of some, doing some extra tax break for businesses so people have an opportunity to open businesses. Maybe we need to, take away some licensing regulations for dumb things like a lemonade stand. It's just like things like that, where it's, okay, what can we do to make it easier for people to find work? I think that's what we should be focusing on.
Okay. So let's get a little bit into the background of this. So New Hampshire's minimum wage is $7.25, if I remember correctly?
Yeah, I think it's on board with the national.
Okay. Yeah, because I'm trying to remember, because New Hampshire doesn't have...
I believe it's $7.25.
Yeah, it's $7.25 because we matched the government's minimum wage.
Yeah, which is the national minimum wage, yeah.
Cool. So this is always a fun conversation, because I said you and I agree on this pretty much down to the T, right?
Okay.
I'm not doing a very good job picking at with their arguments, so I'll just use my own.
Yeah.
So $7.25, and what people often go about is that's all they look at. They look at $7.25, boom, they're done. And they're like, oh, it's one of the lowest minimum wages around, especially in New England. I'm like, okay. But I don't know of any. I'm sure there probably are some. Do you know any businesses that actually pay $7.25 as a minimum wage?
Not that I can think of, honestly.
I'm sure there are some. I don't know where they are. But so this is one of my biggest arguments for the minimum wage. And I know this is your podcast, but we're just talking now, so I'm kind of
you're fine.
$7.25 is a minimum wage. Most businesses, I rarely run into one that doesn't pay at least 10. Sometimes 9. I've seen those, especially in like movie theaters for people just starting out. But for the most part, if you're not making around 10, like Dairy Queen offers $10 an hour.
Yeah.
Stuff like that. So that's always been one of the biggest arguments, is if you let the free market do its thing, it will grow past any of the federal regulations, or any of the regulations to begin with.
Yeah.
So now you'll have, again, like I said, it's $7.25. We're like $2-3 over that easy, just on the free market alone.
Yeah.
And then the natural argument that I always get in return when I bring this up is, well, if it's already higher than that, why not just move it anyway? And I'm like,
well, because there's differences.
Yeah.
So I've had some different jobs in the past, and one of the first ones I ever had was I worked at PetSmart, and this was about 6 years ago or so. So it was a while ago. I mean, I don't know what their pay rates are now. It's probably a little higher now, just due to inflation, right? But at the time, I was getting paid about $8.25 an hour. So that's pretty low. I didn't really care, because I was like, it's my first job. I was expecting minimum wage, because again, that's what people always tell you, is you're going to get paid minimum wage and it's going to be crappy, but I got a little bit more, so I was happy. And I did $8.25. Honestly, I loved it. I literally, there were some days where I literally got paid to play with people's dogs. So I loved it. But after that, I did have a couple jobs where the rate was the $7.25 an hour, but it was sales. So that was like your base rate, but then you also got a commission on top of it. And so, again, I think if they were to raise the minimum wage, and again, it is different because there are like, waitresses and stuff where they get below minimum wage, but they make all their money in tips. So it's a little different. And I do think that does complicate things a little bit because if you don't report your tips, depending on how you do it, it kind of messes if you need to file for unemployment, stuff like that. Yeah. So, but that's, someone's personal how they do it. But generally speaking, if you're looking at, raising the minimum wage, now, in my opinion, that would probably mess up a lot of the sales positions where you have a base rate and then you have a commission. They might turn to like either all commission or something along those lines. But a lot of like what you're seeing now is all these different states that are raising these minimum wages, you're like right after that big push happened to, get those minimum wages raised a couple years ago. Yeah. Now all of a sudden you're coming out with these automation systems. So now there's a number of different, McDonald's, Burger Kings, things like that, where they have like little robots in there flipping burgers, putting everything together. And then someone's at the window grabbing it and going. And so those are jobs lost. Those are people who could have been making a minimum wage and now they're not because we pushed it to make the minimum wage higher. And again, I was, Panera started doing a little bit of an automation system too. You go up to the counter, there's like these little things, you put in the order, and then the people behind the counter make it and you go pick it up. You don't even talk to somebody at the cashier in some of these places now. So again, those are jobs. Those are people who could have had jobs that now don't. And so that's my biggest argument is we don't, when you sit there and say, we'll just raise it to whatever it is now, we don't really know. Just because the jobs you've ran into were higher, jobs I've ran into were higher, that doesn't necessarily mean anything. You know what I mean? Because you don't know what kind of jobs are out there that are paying less. And that minimum wage, like I said, that's really just a starting point. Your goal should not be, I'm just going to work minimum wage for the rest of my life and be content. I believe that personally, people should always be striving to become better, learn new skills. You know, you should be a completely different person by the time you're 30 than when you were in high school. Yeah.
Well, yeah, and personal responsibility is one of those things that's removed from a lot of platforms. It just kind of goes back to what we were talking about earlier about having arguments that are kind of callous. They're kind of supposed to be. Certain parties say science is everything. Science. Well, science is pretty callous. Yeah, and exactly. How it deals with things. And then all of a sudden they're like, oh, no, but politics, we need to be loving. And no, there is a little bit of callousness to it. You can't. This has always been my argument for under-regulation than over, is minimum wage, right? So say we're in one of the biggest black swan events in history, right? Coronavirus comes in, bam, wipes out most of the economy. Yep. No one could see that. Yeah. They see that coming. So now we're in a place where businesses have pretty much collapsed. And if they want to get going again, it's not like when the economy is booming. They can't be like, yeah, we're going to pay $15 an hour. Yeah. So now all of those places that lost all of those businesses have to hire at a rate that the economy can't sustain anymore, in theory. I don't know the full numbers on these things, but that's just my understanding. Yeah. So now, say Massachusetts, I forget what the minimum wage there is, but let's just pretend it's 15, right? Yeah. So now you have all these businesses who are gone, all these new businesses are going to come into place, but now they have a huge barrier. They have to get over that $15 an hour. Yeah. Where if it was $7.25 in New Hampshire, maybe in the short term, maybe for the next couple of years, businesses are paying $7.25 because the economy is not there anymore. Yeah. But at least they could put jobs on the table for $7.25. So the problem with politics is it doesn't adjust for what's actually going on in the times. And it just, because like you said, they can't pull back on things because it's ridiculous. They kind of did for the coronavirus. They were like, oh, temporarily we're suspending all these things. And we didn't need those to begin with then. So that's always been, my take on a lot of this stuff is you can't have a one-size-fits-all for life because it's impossible. And politics, especially with certain platforms, they always just assume things are always going in one direction. I'm like, it's not life. That's not true. Yeah. So,
No, and I agree 100%, and part of it too is there's, the free market, which basically says, hey, whatever businesses are the best are going to succeed and the ones that are the worst are going to go out of business. Yeah. And it's kind of the same thing when it comes to businesses, because if you have, say, a Burger King and a McDonald's, and I'm just using them because it's easy examples, but a Burger King and a McDonald's, and the Burger King is hiring for, $11 an hour to flip a burger, and this one's hiring for $7.25 to flip a burger, where do you think people are going to apply to? It's really, when people are looking for jobs, they're looking for, generally speaking, the highest paid job that they can do with the skill set they have. And so I think, again, that kind of comes back to why a lot of the businesses, they naturally pay a little bit more, because there is a little bit of a competition in there too for them.
Yeah.
People are not going to apply to them if it's a difficult job that doesn't pay well. They're not going to get workers.
Yeah, and that's it. It should be up to the business to decide that, not some
Exactly.
politician who's never worked
Right.
a single day for anybody, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So I know we're getting on almost like 50 minutes here.
That's okay. I like...
Because, we can do this all day. That's the problem with politics, is that we can just go and go and go.
I expected the politician one to be a little bit longer.
So let's get into one of the more fun ones that is always on top of every debate, and that's guns.
Yes.
Yes. This is the one that no matter where you are in the country, no matter what time, this is going to come up, and it comes up quite a bit.
Yeah.
So let's talk about your views on guns in the state as far as gun regulations and laws.
So I will open by saying New Hampshire is one of the most gun-friendly states in the country, and I would definitely vow to keep it that way.
Yeah.
I 100% believe in the Second Amendment. I believe everybody should have the right to own guns. I don't even believe in the red flag, stuff. I think that some of that's ridiculous. In my opinion, I think that everybody should have the opportunity to go out and arm themselves, whether it's for protection, whether it's for hunting, whatever it is they want to do. That's their freedom to choose that. And I also think a lot of that has to do with, if you have a criminal and they've decided that they want to go to a school shooting, that was a big hot topic for a while, even if they don't have access to a gun, they're going to find access to a gun. Even if they can't go through the channels to get one, they're going to still find a way to get one. They always do.
Yeah.
And so sitting there and saying that stricter gun laws are going to stop that, I think is just being naive. It's not, because historically that's not been the case. And so another, interesting concept is you have two schools. One of them has teachers who are armed and trained properly in how to use them and how to safely use them and store them. You have another one who is a gun-free zone. There's absolutely no guns on campus, besides like the school security guard who's going around. I don't even know if they carry guns, honestly, but I would assume so, and you have a person who's, I'm going to go in and shoot up a school, right? Which one are they going to go to? Well, obviously they're going to go to the one where they can do the most damage without getting hurt, right? So that's my biggest thing. I think an armed population is a safer population, because you can protect yourself from somebody who's intending to do harm.
Yeah.
And there was another great example of this church, I think it was a couple of years ago, went viral. But there was a church, and I forget what state it was in now that I'm thinking about it. But somebody came in as an active shooter to take out a church. They came in, started shooting, everybody ducked. Somebody in that church was armed, knew how to use it, literally stood up and shot the shooter. Nobody was hurt except for the shooter. That's amazing. Why, when you sit here and you learn about, actual gun laws and how they work, and, you have all these people who are like, well, active shooters, we should just get rid of guns. It's like, those all happened in gun-free zones. Can we be, logical about it, you know?
So, as you know, I was in the military.
Yeah.
And it's the concept of a soft target versus a hard target.
Okay.
Because when you find a hard target, they're better enforced. They have more weapons. They're situationally set up to be able to engage. And you're like, if you want to attack that place, you need more firepower, and you're probably going to take casualties.
Yep.
So just on that level, they're like, probably not going to attack that. It's too much work.
Yep.
Soft targets generally don't have any protection. So the softer the target, the more you're like, okay, there's not going to be anyone there that can defend themselves.
Yeah.
And you'd be like, boop, and you go towards soft targets.
Yep.
And this is the argument you were just making about.
Yeah, exactly.
If you have two places and one of them you're like, I know half the people in there have guns, and the other one there's nobody that's going to stop me, I'm going there.
Right, exactly, and that's common sense to me.
Yeah.
And, and it's the same concept as, what do they always say? They always say, to keep out a burglar from your home, have a ADT rep come to your, or whatever the security system reps are, have them come to your house, have them, give you the consultation, have them give you a sign.
Yeah.
You don't have to sign up with them, but you have the sign, and you put the sign out in your yard. And just that alone will deter, burglars, because if they're driving down the street and they say this one's probably protected by some security system, I'm not going to have as much time to do whatever it is I want to do before people are alerted. But, down the street a few houses, that one doesn't. Who are they going to pick? And it's like simple things like that, even a beware of dog sign, kids' toys outside, jungle gyms, anything that would alert somebody in the house that there's somebody on their lawn. Those are the kind of things that are going to deter people from coming to rob you. And it's the same concept to me. When you have a school, if you have this gun-free zone that's plastered in the front door, and somebody's in there saying, I want to shoot up a school, that's going to be the target. That's not, it's just, to me, it's common sense. And so, again, I think that, Second Amendment right, I think, is something that we should absolutely not budge on, because people have the right to defend themselves. People have the right to defend their family. And again, part of the Reopen New Hampshire rally, I brought my daughter with me. She's less than 2 years old, but there were a lot of people there who were exercising in broad daylight. They were open carrying. And I'm going to be honest with you, as a parent, that made me feel better, because there's a lot of whack jobs out there.
Yeah.
And them seeing this huge group of, 400 to 500 people all in this, gathering for the Reopen rally that's getting a lot of hate, somebody could easily drive by and just decide, I'm going to shoot up these people because, they're horrible people and they're trying to kill people, and then, but having those people there helped me feel better, because if you just think about it, you say, okay, if somebody's going to come and try to shoot us and they see this amount of people that are armed and here, actively protecting this place, they're probably not going to decide against it, you know? And so just things like that, it's common sense. You're not going to attack somebody who looks like they could attack you back,
No, well, much less likely.
Yeah, right.
Unless
exactly.
you like that type of thing. Yeah.
Right, yeah.
Awesome. So,
unless you're Liam Neeson, right?
Yeah. Let's do whatever I want, right? Yeah. Cool. So that's getting there about an hour. So
Yeah.
I'll cut you free now. So where can people get a hold of you, learn a little more, all that jazz?
Yeah, so I have a Facebook page, and that's facebook.com/Michelle 4 Rep. And that's kind of a great place. I post a lot of endorsements or kind of some of the pledges and the vows that I take as somebody who's running for, state rep. It's also a great way to get a hold of me if you have any questions about where I stand on a certain issue. I try to respond to everybody. So that's a great platform. My website is also www.michelle4staterep.com. And that's where I'm collecting donations for my campaign, which, as much as we all hate asking for money, it's incredibly crucial.
Yeah.
So that's how we buy our signs, that's how we buy our mailers, that's how we do everything we need to do to win. And so if anybody's interested in a sign, definitely reach out to me. If anybody's, just wants to help me, turn everything all red, that helps too, even if you're not in my district, it all helps. So, definitely feel free to go on there and donate, please. And, that's it. I mean, I'm always open to conversations and questions, and,
Cool.
My job is to represent the people, so I need to hear from them.
Cool. Awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining me. It's been fun.
Yes, this has been so much fun. Thank you.
So, again, thank you all for watching. Definitely, like we were saying earlier, I believe everyone is allowed to voice their opinion. So definitely reach out. If you want to support the campaign, do it. If you disagree, then have that conversation. That's perfectly fine. I think now more than ever we should be having these conversations because, like I said, I think there are certain platforms that don't have these conversations, and we're watching them melt down all over the country. So we should probably reconsider our points of view at some point.
Exactly.
So everyone be good, and we'll talk to you next time. Want more New Hampshire Business Show? Find us at iTunes, Stitcher, iHeartRadio, and www.nhbusinessshow.com.